Hey, it's been a long time since we've done one of these, but it feels necessary to get one done here as the Husker 24/7 HoopsCast returns. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. We're talking Nebraska basketball here today, a couple days after the tough loss in Iowa City. BC was in attendance for that one, and a few further days from the nice win over UCLA, though it is fair to wonder if Nebraska broke Mick Cronin. He may have lost his team by choice, I guess. I don't know. That win may sort of topple down from its status. UCLA doesn't kind of pull itself out from the funk that it is in. But we're not worried about UCLA. This isn't the UCLA hoops cast. We'll let them figure it out. This is just a bunch of Midwestern thugs talking about low major Sam Hoiberg and Nebraska basketball, Brian.
Yeah, that was not our words, by the way. Someone else wrote that, and
We
we're
would never write that. We
we're
would never write that.
we're standing up for Sam and the guys who beat UCLA. But yeah, well, we might worry about UCLA with like what their quad
Yeah,
designation
that's what I
is
mean.
when we
That's
get
what I
to
mean.
um March. But yeah, they maybe did break Mick Cronin. It was when they started to answer the question about if the PBA environment mattered or not, and he just it's been kind of a downward spiral since then.
It's got to be up there. I mean, that's got to be the sort of the trigger point for him. But again, we'll let UCLA worry about UCLA. Let's talk about Nebraska. We're not going to spend probably a lot of time on the UCLA game. We're going to talk more about
Mm.
what happened in Iowa City and sort of how Nebraska can respond to it. We'll start with this, Brian. Do you wonder if it's something just about the program that they have a fair amount of these games in recent years where you have a double digit lead in the second half and then you just all of a sudden can't get stops. You can't slow the other team down. You can't keep your lead. Like I'm thinking you go all the way back to Michigan State in 2023. Nebraska's sailing in that game. Second half starts. Michigan State shoots like 80% from 3 point. They flip the game around. Not only are you losing, all of a sudden they're running away with it. I'm talking Minnesota and Rutgers last year. Indiana even came back on Nebraska, and then Nebraska pulled that one away from the Hoosiers. It's just something about it these last few seasons, even when Nebraska has been much, much better. Those double digit leads in the second half don't feel as safe as they should be.
Yeah, maybe. I'd have to look. It'd be an interesting study if you went across like power conference teams, and if most teams had like one or two games where they blew like a 14-point lead or something. Like I last night before I was going to bed, I think Oklahoma blew like a 18-point lead to A&M or something like that, and it actually made me wonder about what you're asking. I was like, does every team like have one or two of those,
Quite
even the good
possible.
one? So maybe, the thing Fred Hoiberg said about this particular team after the game in Iowa City is he said, I feel like we've, for the most part, finished well prior to this. And you're thinking of like the games in Hawaii or against Oregon State, which was a tight game till the end, and against UCLA, and they closed out Indiana well. So I don't know, but it does have that feel like, as a baseball fan, you can relate. It's like a blown save game. It's
Mm.
one of those where you have to walk the dog around the block, a couple extra times because, you gave up 3 runs in the ninth inning. It has that sort of feeling, and it kind of sticks with you the whole next day. And so the big challenge now for Nebraska, and they were good at this last year,
Very good at this.
because remember, a lot of people kind of had them for dead already in December when they went to Minnesota and they blew a 17-point lead. It's like, okay, these guys aren't going to have what it takes. And then they came back and they beat Michigan State, and then they won at Kansas State. And so far this year, I mentioned this in an article, they lost to St. Mary's, and then they had a really tenacious week of practice where they beat Creighton. They came back from the Michigan State embarrassment and beat Indiana. So we'll see. The challenge here, though, Schaefer, is you're going to Purdue, not the Purdue of last year, but still, one of the
Mackey Arena.
toughest places to play in the country, one of them. And obviously, they're still a really good squad. So it's not going to be easy to get past, just Purdue alone, but also that mental part where you got to be like, all right, let's move forward now.
Yeah, one of the things that's difficult for me is it's such a veteran team that it's some of what we saw on Tuesday night completely out of their control, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on that because there's really nothing to say unless we're bringing in the Big Ten head of officiating to explain his thoughts on that game. There's really nothing you and I can talk about in terms of just the camera panning to Fred when he is making the double dribble motion.
He's running after him doing it. I mean,
that was a grade school double dribble.
Yeah.
That is your kid is just learning to play basketball and he's at the YMCA and they're not calling that double dribble, but anyways, I won't talk a lot about the officiating because there's really nothing that we can do there.
We can't change it.
But what Nebraska can do or has to do, they have to be able to protect the ball more. I mean, this team has a lot of turnovers. Like it feels like they are somewhat their own worst enemy in that regard. And you would just think with a veteran point guard in Raleigh Wooster, when a team like Iowa starts to make a run, like you would think you'd be able to lean on that kind of veteran floor general leadership. And they have closed teams out this year effectively. But on Tuesday night, it just felt like when Iowa made its run, Nebraska just did not have the appropriate response. And I don't know. I'm a little surprised that they struggled with it as much as they did. And it is, Iowa was unconscious from the 3-point line. Like this doesn't happen without a superb performance there. But Nebraska also stopped attacking the rim, kept jacking 3-pointers, was doubling in they didn't change their own style of play as Iowa was making this run. And they continue to make unforced errors. They've really got to clean some of that up.
Yeah, that's been an issue. I mean, they had a positive performance going back to Saturday in the second half against UCLA where they really cut down on that, and that was a big part of why they won that game. But you're right, it has crept up a little too much, and I feel like Nebraska lost sort of its even temperament as Iowa made their run, and maybe it was, right away in the postgame, Hoiberg talked about the transition defense and just it was one of those deals where it wasn't just that Iowa would match when Nebraska would get a score. They'd match a score or get 3 to a Nebraska 2 within 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there was Nebraska led 52-37 with 14:55 left. You take that, even Iowa's score, I know Josh Dix was hot in the first half, maybe got a few too many open looks, had 16 points, whatever. But Sanford had been in foul trouble, hadn't scored. Nebraska's had a good defensive metric going with 14:50 to go. And then it's 62-61 by the time you're 8 minutes later. And so it just felt like the transition defense, I think it just how quickly Iowa was able to just get in a rhythm. Okay, come down fast. Hit the trailer sometimes. They just had a nice scheme for how to space it, and Nebraska did not have their wits about how to stop it. And they kind of lost control there of not just they're themselves on the defensive end, but sort of the pace almost of the game. It just immediately became Iowa's style of game that they had to have it after Nebraska, I felt, had kind of controlled it the way they wanted it for 25 minutes or so.
Yeah. And I haven't gone back and rewatched the game. I doubt that I will, but what I seem to remember too, as this stretch was going on, it also felt like Nebraska's own ball movement kind of came to a pause a little bit. They weren't working as much to get some of the open looks that they did. It became much more isolated basketball where you had, and they had success with this in the first half. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you had Bryce attacking the rim or Joanne trying to get to the rim or Andrew Morgan or, Wooster or whatever it was. And they weren't trying to get Iowa out of sorts by just moving the basketball. And, it became a very much a one person trying to score. Well, that also becomes difficulty too when you're not able to finish around the rim. And Nebraska struggled in that regard. And there was a lot of contact, but they either have to be able to get some of those shots. Iowa is not a good interior defensive team.
Yeah.
Even if you're trading threes for twos, they're not going to make every 3-point shot, but you have a higher percentage of being able to make the twos, or theoretically should. It just felt like Nebraska went away a little bit from some successful stuff in the first half, and they got very ISO heavy in the second. And so that I think contributed to a lot of this. It's just frustrating because it felt like you get that win, you set yourself off in this difficult stretch on the right foot where you're 1-0. Now you've got Purdue and Maryland, and then you get Rutgers, and 2-2 in that stretch is a really good, run right there. And now you gotta work for it. Now you're gonna try to steal a game at Mackey or on the road in Maryland, where I don't think Nebraska's won a game since Maryland's been in the Big Ten Conference. I don't think they won at Maryland. They must have, because
I don't remember the last time.
That's
another interesting part of this. Jawan and Bryce talked with the media that was in Iowa City after the game. And Jawan was very determined about it. He's like, this is not going to be a replay of last year. He's like, we're not going to have that. And he's speaking of course, starting 0-7 on the road. It wasn't brought up to him. It came up unsolicited. So, he sat through that him and Bryce both were through that narrative last year of, you guys can only win at PBA. And so they know what they kind of gave away in Iowa City, because it was one of those opportunities not only to get to 3-1 in the league. You make sure that story doesn't start to grow legs, about how you can't win on the road. And sometimes when a story like that starts to take off, it becomes you almost. And so that was unfortunate. The other tough part, that it was not a good crowd. They got into the game, but it was not a hostile environment. It was like half empty. Yeah. And honestly, you could probably tell on your Peacock viewing that you could hear the shoes squeaking all over the place, like it was a JV.
You could hear one very specific Iowa fan for most of the second half.
Yeah,
there wasn't that many people there.
It had a JV before the varsity game feel on Friday at 4 to 5. And I'm not saying Iowa's got a good, proud basketball program, but for this particular game, students weren't there, and the place was not rocking. And so Nebraska, I thought when they went up 15 on the Bryce dunk, it was like, if they can just get to the next media timeout up double digits, this one just might fade to black, Sopranos style, because Iowa was just not a lot of juice. And then Sanford had the juice. It was just like he cleared a ball rack in a 3-point shooting contest all of a sudden. And I thought the one, Fred mentioned it, Sanford mentioned it afterward, he has one that hits off the rim, off the top, goes in. That cut it, I think, to 5. That was one of those possessions where if you get a stop, you get it back to double digits, maybe you're fine. And then it felt like, okay, this bad omen.
They're in this, yeah.
Across the street from where another bad, blown lead happened for Nebraska just a few weeks before.
Yeah, there's something about Nebraska and Iowa, man. You've got to be able to finish that off, and it somehow feels like it counts for 2 losses when the Huskers aren't able to put away that Hawkeye team, regardless of sport anymore.
You mentioned the schedule too. It's been stated by Fred and known that the first 5 games were pretty rough, but the Big Ten as a whole, it's not going to ever be just easy.
It's a fight every night.
And so what's tough about it is, we'll go back to a baseball analogy. You know how this is. If you have sort of a mid team, you're trying to get over 500, and it's like a big deal. Like when you're over like 3 games as opposed to under, you're always chasing something, if not. And so this was a chance to really play from ahead of the 500 number as you go into the season. And now, I'm not saying they can't win Sunday. Purdue is beatable. And they have to look at it as an opportunity. Purdue as a net of 26 would be a huge thing on your resume. So you just got to get back up, say that was bad deal. Should have had it. We know we're a good team. Let's go be collected around the rim though. Jawan Gary was 5 of 21, and it just felt like, not to be too cruel about it, but they just threw up some trash around the rim sometimes.
Oh yeah.
It was just like, come on, guys.
Yeah, no, that was frustrating because, again, you had opportunities in there, and some of it was Joan would make a really nice move. He'd put it off the backboard. You're talking about the Sanford shot that hit every part of the backboard and the rim to go all the way in, and then on the other end, Joan blows by a guy, has the layup, it kicks off the backboard. It somehow hits slightly too hard, rolls around the whole rim, and falls out the side. Like, it's just those are the breaks in college basketball. We haven't talked about this yet. And this has to be another thing where Hoiberg is like, are you kidding me? The free throw shooting.
Oh, yeah.
Just devastatingly bad. You can't have guys missing front ends of one-on-ones. You can't have guys that are missing free throws that are better shooters than that. You can't see Iowa's 58% free throw shooting post player go 5 of 6 in a game in which, at least he was 4 of 5 or whatever it was.
Yeah,
3
he
of
was
4 in the regular
6.
season. Or not the regular, in the regulation, they're 58% free throw shooters cashing, and you're over here with your top guys that are just not able to put it in. Like, that's frustrating too, especially in a game that you go into overtime and you look at the stats. They missed 9 free throws in regulation.
Yeah, Nebraska was 12 of 22 for the game. Bryce was 4 of 4, and Jawan was 3 of 4. So those guys were 7 of 8. Everybody else was 5 of 14. Raleigh Wooster was 2 of 7. Raleigh, I wouldn't say struggled. He hasn't been great at the line, I would say, coming
in. It's like a 70% free throw shooter, which is fine.
His numbers were better than I thought they were.
The problem is he's the ball handler. You want that to be like an 80%. You want that to be almost a guarantee every time he shoots. But didn't Sam Hoiberg miss a free throw in this game too?
Yeah, he did.
Or am I imagining that?
No, you're right. He was 1 of 2. Finished with 5 points. He fouled out too on the, it was desperation time, but he fouled out with like 6 seconds left on when they had to take it.
Right.
And I did think that mattered a little bit when they got to overtime, because I think he's just like a guy who's defensive. The way he talks and has presence out there matters. And Nebraska in OT, unfortunately, because after Bryce hit the 3, you're like, okay, that's a lift. Everybody comes off the bench, let's go. And it was just like they lost a loose ball right away, and then they gave up a transition bucket, and it just started over what Iowa had been building. And Hoiberg said he thought his team lost its emotional, or was a little emotionally not even, I guess is how you would put it, where you have to be, and didn't handle like the 2-minute stretch to start OT well, and it was over basically. They're down 9 with 3 minutes left already in OT.
Yeah, and that's tough to come back when Iowa scores at the rate that they do too. I mean,
and hit 22 of 25 from the line, by the way.
Yeah.
So there.
Yeah. Which, not a team that should be shooting 25 free throws against you with as little as they attack on the basketball, on their end of the basketball court. But
they had none in the first half either. Yeah. So that film had to be disgusting to watch, like the last 15 minutes plus OT, basically.
For a variety of reasons, it had to be a very difficult game to have to go back through and be like, oh, we lost a possession here, I guess, huh? Mm. That's interesting. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to toss in on this team? I mean, I think we've set it up. Got a big game, big opportunity this weekend.
Yeah.
Got a big couple game stretch here. And then, of course, it finishes with Rutgers at home, which the expectation is you have to win that game, which we'll get into that conversation next week. But some big stuff for Nebraska. But if they look at it as an opportunity, and I do feel good about how they flushed stuff last year, like I don't see this game beating them multiple times.
Yeah, sometimes I fall victim to that. I think a lot of people who are fans do about your team. You're like, oh, this is a carry. Okay, here it goes. And you think the snowball is going to happen. I think the guys who are involved a lot of times are able. I'm not saying the next day doesn't suck, like in the morning and stuff. You're still thinking about it. But I would hope we're doing this on Thursday, that it's just full speed ahead now. You have a net ranking of 36. They have a lot of good metrics. They're still where they need to be. And yeah, this game is can give you more than you can lose more from, if that makes sense. So it is a good game in that way. Like the pressure is actually more on you when you're at home. It really is. Like in Iowa felt that, you could tell, and they ended up finding a way to get it done and cash one in. But when you're on the road, it's a real bonus opportunity, but you just got to grab it when it's right in front of you. So hopefully they do, if they have that chance again Sunday.
Well, BC's going to have an opportunity to grab a victory and guess a random Husker hooper
Okay.
as we move forward with this. I gave him a little bit of a hint. This is not a deep cut. This is a guy that, if you've been watching Nebraska basketball for a little while, you're familiar with this name. Certainly, if you're someone around our collective age range, you know this player pretty well. So I'm gonna make it a little more difficult. I'm not gonna give you the super easy stuff. I will tell you, he started 61 games in his career. He started every game as a senior, started more routinely in his sophomore year and then his junior year. But he didn't start every game as a junior. He only had 1 year where he started every game. That was as a senior. This is a guard.
Okay.
Do you have any just quick guesses? 4-year player at Nebraska. So not a transfer, not just a one-hit wonder. This is a guy who played from freshman year on.
I don't know if he was a 4-year guy. For some reason, 61 starts, and maybe I'm way off. I was thinking like a Ray Gallegos.
Not Ray Gallegos.
Did he play 4 years?
Ray Gallegos, I think, played 4 years. Yeah, I think that's right.
How many games?
Even have a 5th year because he redshirted.
How many games do you think Ray Gallegos started?
I would think significantly south of 61. I would guess like
that's way off.
30 starts for Ray Gallegos.
Yeah, I was looking it up. You're probably right. Anyway, continue.
All right.
That was a bad guess. Bad guess.
His only season in double-digit scoring came as a senior, where he was a 92% free throw shooter and averaged 14 points a game.
(92-14). Man, my brain is so not ready for this.
In current, like if he was a more modern player, coaches would, if he was a more modern player, coaches would never want him shooting 2-point baskets because he was a worse shooter from 2 percentage wise than he was from 3.
Okay. Are we talking about like Kerry Cohorn or
Kerry Cohorn? Congratulations, Brian. You got it correct. You used a guess on Ray Gallegos, and then it was Kerry. I knew if I was like, oh, the guy who absolutely lit Kansas up, but Nebraska couldn't win the game. Like, I think you would have jumped all over.
You know what, though? I only had about 3 names that I could have thrown at you, and my brain would have just shut off at that point. It's one of those days. But Cohorn, man, he was one of the guys I remember most as a Husker when he was about to let it go. It was just everybody stands at the same time. It's going down sort of player. And those are my favorite basketball players.
He averaged 7.5, nearly 7.5 3-point attempts a game as a senior, made 3.2 of those, shot 47% from 3 as a junior. Was just a really solid player all the way through. Not
out
like
of Iowa
superstars. Yep. I was going to say Minden, Iowa at one point, but I didn't know if that would give it away either. But yeah, I thought he would have had more starts. I didn't realize he really didn't. He didn't start every game as a junior, and he started just part of the time as a sophomore, and then finally by his senior year, because he's a split knee and Collier guy. I think he had 2 years of knee and 2 years of Collier.
Yeah. By the way, Gallegos was on the Husker squad the whole time. I didn't remember that. But
yeah,
I don't know how many starts. Yet.
Oh, you can find it. Let me see if I can find that.
He averaged 7.
Someone needs to talk though.
I'll keep talking. He averaged 7.3 and 1.4 assists as a senior. Yeah, I remember his.
Ray Gallegos way more starts than I had guessed.
How many?
55.
Oh man, so I wasn't an idiot.
No, you weren't that far off.
Yeah,
his 3-point shooting significantly worse than Kerry Cohorn. Not even in the same planet. was a 30% 3-point shooter by the time he left Lincoln.
Didn't he? Junior year, he averaged what? 12.5. He had a good junior year, and then the senior year it didn't quite hit what it was the year before.
He was a great role player for that senior team, though. I mean, because that was an NCAA tournament team. He came off the bench. I think he lit up somebody. I don't know if it was Indiana. I remember Walter Pitchford, I think more for Indiana. But he lit somebody up off the bench that run that they had in the month of February of 2014. I don't want this to be offensive, but I know you're a Seinfeld guy. The best way to describe Ray Gallegos is a chucker.
Okay.
I mean, that junior year, he averaged 12.5 points a game. He took 8.2 3-point attempts a game, and he made 2.5. So, I mean, he was a volume shooter.
And sometimes the biggest thing is if you made a team, even if you're not hitting on a given night, if you're that type of player, if you are a type of scout where they have to think about it for 3 days before they play you, and their whole roster knows, okay, we got to cover this up. It opens up so many other things when you have guys like that. So anyway, that's some deep Hubie Brown basketball knowledge like I was giving there. But
it would have fit right in on Peacock where they were showing when Nebraska was rolling. They could not wait to show you the floor spacing and how Nebraska was just isolating individual defensive players and then abusing them. And they were having a great time. And all of a sudden, Samford starts just knocking down 3-pointers and it's a different game.
Yeah. Well, onward for the Huskers, 12-3, 2-2. Maybe next week we'll be talking about how they got one in Purdue. I don't know when's the last time they did that.
Well, they haven't beaten Purdue since joining the Big Ten, so they may never have a win there.
They've never won there.
So I think what the statistic is of the non-new teams coming from the Pac-12, Nebraska has won in every building but the Mackey. So they must have gotten a win at Maryland at some point. I just don't remember it.
Huh. I didn't know that yet. I haven't dug into that previewing that game, but yeah, so that'd be a big. I mean, and it's not the same Purdue as last year. Good team, not quite as don't have Edie. So let's see what happens.
Yep, it's another opportunity for kind of Bryce to continue to remind people that he is very good at basketball and deserves the benefit of the doubt from the 3 people who control the flow of a basketball game more often than maybe he gets. That's all I got. Do you have anything else you want to add here?
No, your commentary was hopefully picked up by the officials across the league, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think they would have heard the commentary from me by this point in time. If I ever make my way back to Big Ten media days, I'm just going to sit on – the only thing I'm sitting in on is Bill Carollo and asking what it is that he grades officials on and why we continue to see the same ones year in and year out. You think he's excited for those questions?
I think you're blocked by 7 or 8 officials on X. They've picked up that you go after big officials.
Well, they need to be better.
Hey, we weren't going to do this. We weren't going to do this.
Yeah, no. We're not going to do it. We're done. Everybody, we will be back with more Huskers hoops coverage throughout the weekend. Nebraska plays, I believe it's Sunday game for Nebraska.
Sunday game.
Yes, Nebraska plays on Sunday. BC will have the coverage from that. I don't think he's planning on going to West Lafayette, but who knows? Sometimes he just likes a nice drive.
I do,
but
not this one.
He doesn't want that long of a drive. So we'll have more coverage of basketball here next week as well. Of course, we have plenty of coverage of everything, transfer portal, football, all of it. Brunch just informed me baseball practice starts here pretty soon. So plenty of baseball stuff coming up at Husker247.com. That's your spot for Nebraska athletics. We'll catch you next time.